Welcome back to Summary Central. Today we are condensing one of the most mind-bending philosophy books of the last decade into a tight, punchy 5-minute walkthrough. The Courage to be Disliked takes the entire idea of happiness and flips it upside down. It challenges everything you think you know about confidence, relationships, identity, and why you feel stuck. It does this through a conversation between a young man overwhelmed by life and a philosopher who seems almost too calm for his own good. And by the time their discussion ends, the young man's worldview has been shattered and rebuilt. Ours will be too. Part 1. The book opens with the philosopher stating something bold. Your life is not determined by your past, not your childhood, not your trauma, not the embarrassing moments that keep you awake at night. According to Adlerian psychology, your behavior is not caused by your history. It is motivated by the purpose it serves right now. That means when you say you cannot do something because of the past, what you are really saying is that avoiding discomfort in the present feels safer. Pain becomes an explanation. Excuses evolve into identity, and suddenly your entire life becomes built around stories you never questioned. The young man finds this insulting. He believes he is defined by past wounds. The philosopher does not deny those wounds. He denies their authority. He insists that interpretation, not events, shape identity. Two people can experience the same hardship and choose entirely different futures. One uses the past as a reason to stop, the other uses it as a reason to grow. The difference is not in the event, it is in the meaning assigned to it. And if meaning is chosen, then identity can be rewritten. This leads to the book's first major insight. You are living inside a story you believe about yourself. If the story says you are incapable, you behave as if you are. If the story says you are broken, you act as if you are. The philosopher argues that the story is not destiny. The story is a choice, and rewriting it requires only one thing: the courage to stop hiding behind it. The young man finds this insulting. He believes he is defined by past wounds. The philosopher does not deny those wounds. He denies their authority. He insists that interpretation, not events, shape identity. Two people can experience the same hardship and choose entirely different futures. One uses the past as a reason to stop, the other uses it as a reason to grow. The difference is not in the event, it is in the meaning assigned to it. And if meaning is chosen, then identity can be rewritten. The young man then asks why it is so hard to stop caring about what others think. The philosopher explains that people live inside a prison built from approval. They dress for approval. They work for approval. They speak for approval. They shape their personalities around what they think will earn praise and avoid rejection. He calls this living under the dictatorship of imagined expectations. And the key to freedom is simple. This idea blooms into one of Adler's most influential contributions: the separation of tasks. The philosopher explains that every moment of stress comes from mixing your tasks with someone else's. Your task is your behavior. Their task is their reaction. Your task is your choices. Their task is their opinions. When you try to manage someone else's task, you suffer. When you let others control your task, you suffer. Peace comes from staying in your lane. This is not indifference. It is responsibility. For your life, not theirs. The young man panics. He thinks this means relationships will fall apart. The philosopher says the opposite. Real relationships are built on equality, not control. When you stop trying to earn approval, you stop manipulating people with niceness. When you stop fearing rejection, you show up honestly. Healthy relationships appear when both people operate from autonomy instead of fear. This takes us to another core lesson. Much of what we call kindness is actually fear in disguise. Avoiding conflict, pleasing people, keeping harmony at any cost. These are strategies to avoid being disliked. They are not rooted in love. They are rooted in fear. And fear-based behavior always comes at the expense of your true self. The philosopher then delivers one of Adler's most controversial ideas. All problems are interpersonal problems. In other words, every internal struggle can be traced back to your imagined relationship with others. Fear of embarrassment comes from imagining judgment. Fear of failure comes from imagining disappointment. Insecurity comes from imagining comparison. The philosopher says that the moment you leave the world of approval and comparison, most problems lose their power, which leads into another surprising theme. Identity is not fixed. Adler believed that people behave according to their goals, not their personality. If you avoid people, your goal may be safety. If you act shy, your goal may be protection. If you act confident in one situation and timid in another, this reveals that your personality changes based on purpose, meaning you can choose new goals and therefore new behaviors. Identity becomes flexible, not predetermined. The young man insists trauma still controls people. The philosopher agrees trauma is real, but rejects the idea that trauma is destiny. He says the meaning someone assigns to trauma determines the future, not trauma itself. This is not dismissal. This is liberation. If trauma is not destiny, then healing becomes possible. Growth becomes possible. Choice becomes possible. Then comes one of the most difficult truths in the book. People fear happiness. Not consciously, but psychologically. Happiness requires change. Happiness requires responsibility. Happiness requires courage. People avoid action because action threatens their familiar identity. Misery becomes comfortable because it is known. Growth becomes terrifying because it is unknown. And so people stay stuck while convincing themselves change is impossible. The philosopher then focuses on competition. He argues that life becomes unbearable when you see it as a ranking system. The moment you compare yourself to others, you create inferiority or superiority. And superiority is simply inferiority wearing a disguise. The philosopher says the only way to escape this trap is to step out of the hierarchy entirely. Not to win, not to lose, to stop playing. When you stop competing, you become free to contribute. Part 2. The philosopher now presents one of the most life-changing ideas in the book. The willingness to be ordinary. Not mediocre. Not uninspired. Ordinary. Meaning, you do not need to be exceptional to be worthy. You do not need to outperform anyone to have value. You do not need to build an identity around being special. The philosopher explains that the obsession with being exceptional is a symptom of inferiority feelings. When people insecure, insecure, they chase superiority as compensation. This creates a cycle of pressure, exhaustion, and unhappiness. The young man hates this idea because, like most people, he equates ordinariness with insignificance. But the philosopher dismantles this belief. He explains that if everyone is equal in worth, then being ordinary is not a downgrade. It is freedom. Freedom from comparison. Freedom from envy. Freedom from the exhausting attempt to earn a place in the world. When you release the need to be special, you finally have space to grow authentically. The young man struggles to accept this. He feels the world is harsh and people are judgmental. The philosopher challenges this viewpoint. He explains that the world feels hostile because the young man has oriented himself toward it through fear. When you approach life expecting rejection, you interpret everything as threat. When you approach life through contribution, you interpret everything as opportunity. The world reflects the attitude you bring into it. From here, the philosopher introduces the purpose of problems. He explains that many emotional struggles function as protection. Anxiety may protect you from trying. Loneliness may protect you from vulnerability. Hesitation may protect you from failure. These patterns are not chosen consciously, but they serve a purpose. The moment you understand the purpose behind your struggle, you can choose a new purpose. You can choose growth instead of protection. Your struggle, you can choose a new purpose. You can choose growth instead of protection. The conversation then turns toward action. The philosopher explains that people often wait to feel confident before taking action. But confidence does not come first. Action does. A person becomes confident by acting through fear, not by waiting for fear to disappear. Every courageous moment builds identity. Every small act of authenticity builds freedom. Transformation is not a sudden breakthrough. It is the accumulation of courageous choices made in the present. The young man then asks how this philosophy applies to relationships. The philosopher introduces the 3 life tasks: work, friendship, and love. All 3 become overwhelming when driven by fear or approval, but when approached through contribution and equality, they become fulfilling. Work becomes meaningful when it is seen as service rather than competition. Friendship becomes supportive when both people honor each other's autonomy. Love becomes healthy when it operates on trust and mutual respect rather than control. The philosopher emphasizes that love is the most demanding task because it requires 2 complete individuals. Love falls apart when one person tries to control the other's tasks. Real love can only flourish when each person stands on their own feet and chooses the other freely. The philosopher also explains that modern relationships collapse under the weight of approval seeking. When you constantly monitor how others perceive you, you lose authenticity. When you lose authenticity, intimacy becomes impossible. People fall in love with performances, not with reality. And performances cannot be sustained. The courage to be disliked is also the courage to be truly known. Next, the philosopher speaks about boundaries. Separating tasks is not abandoning people. It is respecting their autonomy and protecting yours. You support others, but you do not control their reactions, choices, or emotions. You encourage them, but you do not interfere. You care for them, but you do not manage their tasks. This boundary is what makes relationships stable and respectful. The young man admits that this feels unnatural. The philosopher smiles and explains that most people live their entire lives trying to predict reactions. What will they think? What will they say? Will they approve? Will they judge? This constant anticipation keeps people from living authentically. It keeps them stuck in imaginary conflicts. The philosopher explains that you cannot control whether someone likes you. You can only choose whether you live in alignment with your values. The conversation then moves to the nature of meaning. The philosopher explains that happiness emerges from contribution, not comparison. When you focus on being useful rather than being impressive, your relationships deepen and your anxiety decreases. When you contribute from your authentic strengths, you build a sense of purpose that does not depend on praise. This prepares the young man for the final insight. The courage to be disliked is ultimately the courage to be free. Freedom does not mean doing whatever you want. Freedom means choosing your life based on your own values rather than fear of judgment. It means accepting that some people will misunderstand you. It means knowing that rejection is not a catastrophe. It is simply proof that you are no longer performing. Part 3. The philosopher ends the discussion by returning to the central question: what does it mean to live a good life? His answer is simple, but uncomfortable. A good life is one lived with intention, not fear. A life where your actions reflect your values instead of the expectations of others. A life where you pursue meaning rather than validation. A life where you accept yourself without needing to be superior or exceptional. A life where relationships are built on respect, not control. A life where you recognize that you belong to a larger human community and that your contribution matters, not because it earns praise, but because it reflects who you choose to be. The young man asks how this philosophy can actually change someone's daily life. The philosopher explains that every moment presents a small opportunity for courage. Courage to say what you mean. Courage to act on your goals. Courage to accept imperfection. Courage to support others without controlling them. Courage to let go of old stories. Courage to move forward despite fear. Every courageous act strengthens your sense of agency. Every authentic choice reinforces your freedom. The philosopher emphasizes that the courage to be disliked is not a rejection of people. It is a rejection of fear. When you stop trying to earn approval, you become capable of real connection. When you stop seeking validation, you can finally experience genuine belonging. When you stop performing, you become someone who acts from purpose. And this, he says, is what creates happiness. Not success, not praise, not status, but the quiet confidence that your life reflects your true self. The young man begins to understand. He realizes he has spent years living reactively, trying to avoid disapproval, trying to win comparisons, trying to escape inferiority by chasing superiority. But all of these paths led him away from himself. The philosopher explains that the moment you step out of the competition, everything becomes lighter. You stop measuring your worth. You stop defending your ego. You stop fighting battles that were never yours to fight. The philosopher concludes with a final reminder. You do not need to fix your past to live differently. You do not need to become a different person. You simply need to choose different actions today. One decision at a time, one boundary at a time, one moment of contribution at a time. Your entire life can shift because identity is flexible and purpose-driven. Change begins the moment you act from courage instead of fear. This is the heart of Adler's philosophy. Freedom is available right now. Happiness is available right now. Meaning is available right now. But you must choose them. You must choose to be authentic even when it is uncomfortable. You must choose to contribute even when it is unnoticed. You must choose to let people dislike your choices if your choices reflect who you truly are. That is not rebellion. That is maturity. That is responsibility. That is the foundation of a fulfilled life. And as the conversation ends, the young man realizes that the courage to be disliked is actually the courage to be fully and unapologetically alive. Not controlled by fear, not shackled by the past, not trapped in comparison, but free to live openly, contribute honestly, and connect authentically. Thank you for watching Summary Central. If this 5-minute breakdown helped you rethink something in your life or gave you a fresh perspective, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a new summary. And if you want more depth or a slower pace, check out the 15-minute and 30-minute versions linked below. See you in the next one.